On day 213 of the second Trump administration, a search and rescue operation is still underway for an American service member inside Iran. That missing service member is one of two crew members who was aboard a U.S. F-15E fighter jet when it was shot down earlier today. This marked the first time Iranian forces have successfully downed a U.S. fighter jet since the war began. The other crew member has already been rescued, thankfully, according to two U.S. officials who spoke with MS Now. Iranian officials are reportedly also searching for that missing service member. Through state media, the Iranian government promised a reward to any resident who helps in their capture and turns them over alive to security forces. Around the same time the fighter jet was shot down, a second Air Force combat plane crashed near the Strait of Hormuz. The Wall Street Journal reports that this plane was also shot down by Iran. MS Now, we should say, has not yet confirmed that. However, a U.S. official did tell MS Now that the lone pilot in that case was safely rescued. In a brief interview with NBC News, President Trump insisted that today's events will not affect negotiations with Iran, quote, at all. Hours earlier, he also made history with a request for a $1.5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in defense spending. That would be the largest in modern history. This was part of his overall budget proposal for the 2027 fiscal year. The budget also includes $73 billion in cuts to non-defense spending. That means things like health research, K-12 and higher education, renewable energy, climate grants, a low-income housing energy program, and community development block grants, which cover things like childcare. In total, a 10% reduction from the current fiscal year. With that, I want to bring in our nightcap, Ron Insana, veteran financial journalist and publisher of The Message of the Markets on Substack, MS Now political analyst Molly Jong-Fast, a contributing writer for the New York Times Opinion and a host of the podcast Fast Politics, Paul Rieckhoff, founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America and host of the podcast Independent Americans, and Anthony Fisher, senior editor for MS Now Daily. Thanks, everyone, for joining me tonight. Paul, I want to start with you. Can you walk us through how dangerous this search and rescue mission might be, particularly since we do not have ground troops in the area?
Exceptionally dangerous. I think it's important to say we now have boots on the ground. We have pilots that have been shot down. We have rescue operations underway. I would also say, look, we're better at this than anybody in the world. I mean, our military prowess and excellence will be on full display. I mean, these pilots are exceptionally trained to evade and survive, and the rescue operations will be the full might of the military to get them out. Everybody who gets shot down or potentially could get shot down knows that they will come get you. But I think politically and socially, this is really the worst case scenario. The idea that an American pilot could be held hostage by the Iranians is a very daunting prospect and an example of how this war is continuing to go sideways. This is undoubtedly the worst day of the war since 6+ Americans were wounded and killed in Saudi Arabia. And it's an example of how Trump does not have control of this situation. He can say that he's determining when he leaves or when he does things. But the reality is the hornet's nest has been disrupted now, and the hornets will decide when it's over. And today is, I think, another example of how the popularity of this war is going to continue to drop, especially within his base. He's never gotten the country behind it. And now that's
well, he hasn't really tried very hard to get the country behind it.
No, he hasn't, but he's throwing our troops out, right? And anytime a president commits the country first and then commits the troops, we get into a disaster. And this is shaping up to be on the same trajectory.
So, Molly, to that point about what Trump says about the war, I want to read you a few things that he has said about Iran's military capacity. He said Iran's military capacity was decimated, its navy gone, its air force in ruins, its factories and rocket launchers blown to pieces, its ability to launch drones and missiles dramatically curtailed. Yet, here we are. So how do you reconcile the things that he is saying with the actual military capabilities that we saw in action, unfortunately, today?
Well, this speaks to all the reporting about Susie Wiles being worried that Donald Trump is he's not getting out of his information bubble. And we know reporting that Donald Trump watches videos of some of the strikes, and that's how he gets a lot of information. So that will not necessarily track with what's actually happening. I mean, this war is already a quagmire. We're 35 days into it. We never got explained why the American people were involved in this to begin with. There have been all shifting explanations from this administration. There has never been any any interest in rallying around the flag, because there has been no explanation. And if you don't explain why you're going in there, you couldn't explain what victory might look like. And so it's already really unpopular. The numbers for sending troops in there are something like, in the single digits. Maybe they've come up a little bit. But this is just a war that has no purpose. And also there's this added thing, which is it's making gas wildly expensive.
Yes. Well, that's a good transition for what I wanted to ask Ron about. The second plane that we heard about today, the A-10, that went down near the Strait of Hormuz, is what we were told. The strait is obviously still effectively closed to most shipping traffic. I feel like every time I see you, I ask this question, but why is the market reaction to this still so muted, almost indifferent in some ways?
Well, yesterday wasn't quite as muted as everyone thought, right? So oil prices certainly spiked up and went up rather significantly, 10% in a single day. And so now we're pushing gasoline prices to nearly $4.10 a gallon nationally. And I think as this wears on, and I think as more and more investors or traders understand that we are at war, and this has a slightly longer tail than they originally believed, because this now, given that the Strait of Hormuz is still closed and some of the last vessels that left the strait have now reached their destination with no more coming, that implies shortages. That implies that more disruption in energy, in fertilizer, and a whole host of products that come through that region. And people will start to feel this around the world and here at home. So it may not have hit home immediately, and they may have taken the president and others at their word that this was going to be a limited operation. But it is not entirely in the president's control. As everyone says, Iran has a vote, and they're making that vote known. And from what we're seeing in some published reports this afternoon, Iran's also recovering some of the missiles that have been buried under rubble from some of the strikes that the U.S. has engaged in, and maybe reconstituting their military force. So this doesn't, irrespective of what the president says, it doesn't mean that it's going to end in 2 or 3 weeks, because Iran, and they did again today, hit some other facilities outside the country that could make this energy crisis last longer than people realize.
Yeah, Anthony, I'm curious how you expect public opinion to develop on all of this, given that, as we've been talking about, the war started out quite unpopular. If you look at the polling from prior wars, the invasion of Iraq, for example, Afghanistan, it wasn't until a little ways in that people started to question it, or at least to become much more averse to the purposes and opinions of how things were going. It seems like we started out not on great footing. Again, this is just, forget the strategy, just the politics of it. Given rising gas prices, given the news today, where do you see things going from here?
Well, I think the outrage is going to grow. As you said, Afghanistan came in the wake of 9/11. There was a reason that it was popular at the first. And even Iraq, which proved wildly unpopular and a huge failure, there was a concerted effort for over a year to sell this to the public. They went to Congress. They went to even the UN. This war started days after Trump's State of the Union, where he didn't mention it at all. So it was, even though we knew warships were going to the region, even though there was a lot of bellicose rhetoric, nobody really thought this was going to happen this severely, this quickly, without any accountability, about any explanation at all. What I really think it lays bare is the absolute fraud of Trump's version of populism. Trump's version of populism, Trump was always, his version of populism was always trying to get people to resent other people. Whoever has something, it means you don't have something. And whether that meant, a person who was from a protected class got a job, that meant somebody else didn't get the job. Like you said, $1 trillion for the Pentagon and billions of dollars in social services going to be cut. His voters rely on a lot of those social services, especially in red states. This is not Trump isn't up for election again, but his party is up for election again. And it's really going to be hard to repeat the populist message, not only from 2016 to 2020, but especially 2024. That was what they ran on. It's really going to be hard to sell that again. And I can't imagine if more U.S. service members are dying, going missing, or if gas prices continue to rise and the strait doesn't open up, our allies, our Gulf Arab allies continue to get hit. I just cannot imagine that this isn't going to be massively unpopular for the rest of Trump's administration.